thank you so much for joining us for today's Sales Hacker webinar. We are super excited to have Gabe Larsen with us from InsideSales.com. Gabe and I have been doing a couple webinars of late, so I know he's always got something interesting and fun to say. And I'll apologize that my camera doesn't seem to be working today, so you get my voice, but his handsome looks. So, Gabe, thanks for joining us today. Well, just before we jump right into it, you maybe want to tell people a little bit about you and what you've been doing over at InsideSales.com.
Sure, Richard. I'm sad I don't get to see your pretty face. Yesterday, we were able to join arms a little bit closer there, but I understand you've got places to be and things to do. So right now, you're just seeing my pretty face. I hope that's all right. I'm super excited to be here. I've been at InsideSales.com 3 years. I've jumped around a little bit. I originally started our strategic consulting team that we call now Momentum. Lately, though, I've moved into a new role we're calling Inside Sales Labs. It's going to be more around some of the content we're producing, some of the test and research that we'll be doing, and so I'm excited to kind of try something different while I'm here. But excited to be on.
That's great. Well, as we get started with this on this Sales Hacker webinar, I was able to get my camera up, so we were ready to roll. But also wanted to let people know that we are doing questions as always, and in sort of traditional Sales Hacker fashion. Please feel free to send your questions in as we have the conversation. It makes it a lot more engaging and a lot more fun. So we will always have questions at the end of the session. But certainly, if you've got something in the moment that's massively relevant, please put those in, because that, I think, will make the conversation way more interesting and hopefully a little bit more entertaining than the two of us just chatting the whole time. So with that being said, I think, Gabe, you've got control. If you want to go ahead and start your presentation, let's get rolling.
Yeah, let's do it. So, Richard, is it best if they want to make comments, do they use the questions or do they use the chat in this function?
No, I think the questions is usually the easiest one we can do.
Perfect. So I want to see who we've got here on the session today. So if you can, open up that question box on the right-hand side. This is going to be interactive whether you like it or not. Tell me your name and where you're from, just so we can start using that. And while you do that, I'm going to go ahead and start into kind of my presentation. We're going to be talking about 7 Cadence templates to double your contact rates in 20 days today. The reason I wanted to jump on this topic, you guys, is I wanted to get tactical. Sometimes, it may be one of my weaknesses, maybe I'm not strategic enough, to be honest, but sometimes I think we talk philosophically, we talk high level, but I want to get into the nitty gritty. I want to show you what's been working in the InsideSales.com labs, some of the templates, why we're doing it, how many contacts, how many dials, how many social touches, and then you can try them yourself. So we're going to get tactical today, and at the end, I've got a couple templates I wouldn't mind you using. So before I jump in, I want to ask a question here about cadences, and maybe, Richard, we can see if we can get some questions in the question box. How many dial attempts, when you think about your cadence, are you actually making? Number of dial attempts that you're actually making when it comes to your cadence. See if you can't throw it in the box there. I'd love to see where the market is generally on this. Richard, what is your feel? Where do you feel like people actually are when it comes to number of dial attempts in a cadence strategy?
Well, and you may have to repeat my answer, because I'm hearing that sometimes I'm getting some bad audio sound. I'm hoping this is a little better. But, for me, it's around 15 to 18 touches over so many days. And then I always instruct people or guide them into making some of those dials. I try not to specify dials specific only, because, you do need a cadence of social touches and email and phone call. So it just sort of depends on over what time frame. So some people it's 15 business days, sometimes it's 30 business days. It just depends. But I'd certainly love to hear your stress for dials as opposed to other touches as well.
Yeah, so we'll get into kind of the balance, and I do really like the balance. We're still seeing, we actually just updated this concept. We're still seeing that the market in general, when you look at number of leads that enter a database. We're still seeing dial attempts pretty low, hovering more in that 1.5 kind of range. When it comes to voice messages, and it'd be interesting to hear your opinion on this, Richard, a lot of people saying voice messages are dead. We actually just are getting ready to release a communication study where we check to see our voicemails actually dead and some interesting results there. But 50 to 70% of the time, people aren't leaving voice messages. Is that true for kind of what you're experiencing, Richard?
Yeah, I think we are. Again, I always think that people do need to leave a voicemail. It's the quality of the voicemail that's going to matter the most. So I'm going to see if I can work on my audio. So, Gabe, I'm going to let you sort of run this for a second.
Okay, perfect. So I'll go forward. So voice messages, the question is it valuable? Should we be using it? I want to touch on that today. Emails. A lot of times we're just sending 1 to 2 emails here. 70% of unanswered sales emails stopping after one attempt. So how do we bring emails into it? And then lastly, this is a study that we just did internally at InsideSales.com. LinkedIn InMail had 3x the response rate compared to email, literally testing the exact same subject, exact same body. So interesting bringing social into your Cadence strategy. Now, couple things that I wanted to mention. This is actually a little bit of a throwback here. For those of you who've been around and have known InsideSales.com, company's been around since 2004. I actually originally started my career at InsideSales.com. I ran a team, had 5 people. That was, it wasn't even called InsideSales.com back then. It was actually called Sales Team Automation. I was there about 2003, 2002. Anyways, what you're seeing right here is a throwback to about 2006, I think. This is the logo. I'm sure marketing does not want me to show this, but I wanted to do it anyways. This is the InsideSales.com logo way back when, but I thought it was interesting because what you're seeing here on the next slide is actually the first Cadence, and this is the first Cadence I've been able to find on the internet. This goes, again, back to about 2006. Our first Cadence looked basically like this, and you can see we had a 30-minute strategy, a 24-hour strategy, and then days 2 through 14, and then 2 weeks to month 12. So we actually did it over a full year and kind of brought in a marketing piece, and you'll see voice messages, phone calls, dials, etc. So we've been talking about this for years, but we've recently dove back down a couple interesting things. So our definition of Cadence is a sequence of plays to optimize contact and qualification rates. Certainly, I think you can go deeper in this, but there's a couple key pieces that I think are worth mentioning in this definition. The first one is it's a sequence. My goodness, a cadence cannot be a one and done. It has got to be multiple touches over a certain time frame. In addition, a sequence consists of a structured play set. It is almost like a playbook. You can't just have one play. So if you're thinking you can just do dials, you're probably in the wrong place. If you're thinking you can just do social, I know it's more fun to play on social channels, but I'd also recommend not doing that. I was in Boston, what was this, just 2 weeks ago, and the sales development leader said, honestly, Gabe, my team is turning into email marketers. That's all they want to do. I don't think we want that either. And so finding a balance in a cadence is going to be really important. Last but not least, kind of the end goal of a cadence is to boost contact and qualification. I think some people miss on this. I think some people say it's just there to boost contact or live conversations, but you do it the right way and you engage people down that funnel, you can absolutely see it affect your qualification rate. So that's our definition of cadence. Let's get into how you make up a cadence or how you kind of structure this cadence. And this is alluding to, that I just mentioned a minute ago, a study on communication best practices. This is actually still in the hopper, so it's not officially been released, but this is one piece that I thought was pretty interesting. And I want to focus in on kind of cadence around this concept. So what you're seeing here is us interviewing B2B decision makers and saying to them, how likely are you to respond if somebody emails you? How likely are you to respond to a voicemail? How likely are you to respond to a social touch? And we actually asked a couple other pieces on this, but I thought the thing that was interesting was notice the likelihood to respond to the different forms of communication. Now, truthfully, as this study, as you dive down lower, if you dive into the segmentation of it and you say, hey, let's look at executives versus millennials or an age group, this actually changes, not drastically, but it's pretty interesting. Big takeaway here is email's predominant. That's the motion, the method that people are saying I'm most likely to respond to. Voicemail, though, was definitely surprising. Now, this one is one that is slightly different when you break it out by age group, but voicemail, according to our own data here, is alive and well. We probably need to reposition it as to the purpose of it, but I think it's alive and well. And then lastly, social, social, as you look at this study, really coming on strong and having a very strong effect in the way that people communicate, prospect, etc. So I've included these four. Oh, sorry, Richard.
Yeah, Gabe, I want to jump in, and I'm gonna do something really old school and hold my phone to my ear in the year 2016. But we got some really solid comments and questions coming in, and I wanted to sort of back up a little bit too on the social.
Please.
Is that, one of the things that's interesting, or at least that I'm seeing, is that where you have LinkedIn sort of on this far right-hand side of the graph, I'm suggesting and seeing people actually move their social to before the first email ever goes out, right? And I don't mean social LinkedIn in-mails. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm seeing a bit of a surge where people are trying to use social as a way to warm up the conversation just a little bit, right? Or to let someone know that they're paying attention to them, whether it's a Twitter like or a Twitter follow or a Twitter retweet or a LinkedIn share or a LinkedIn comment on something someone's blogged about. And so I'm seeing people do some social touch before they actually ever even reach out. And we've seen it, meaning that you're sort of earning the right to turn around and try to connect with them as opposed to just immediately trying to connect with them. So the cadence often still takes the same number of 15 to 17 or 18 business days. But what's happening is the initial touch, the first phone call, the first email, whatever it is, doesn't occur until maybe the fourth or fifth step. And it's still very early for us to determine if that's increasing conversion rates, because that's what we're trying to focus on, is increasing that conversion rate from connection to an engagement. But I was just curious, have you guys looked at that yet? Is that something you're trying to talk about, or where are you guys in that process?
Yeah, I mean, social definitely has a place, and I think the process you just outlined of kind of commenting and warming it up and then potentially connecting and then call to action, those are kind of the three-step process I usually coach on for including social in your cadence. Again, comment, connect, and then call to action. So I love the warm-up strategy. And truthfully, I feel like one big differentiation we notice in some of the data we've pulled is that strategy of potentially using email or social to warm up works more effectively in what we refer to as a relational or account-based prospecting kind of initiative.
Okay.
If you're more in the transactional world, and we can kind of define what those were, but then you more starting potentially with a little more aggressive communication, potentially such as maybe email or phone, it does seem to be more effective. So I'm a little bit out on maybe which one is best overall, but certainly I can say right now we're seeing more effective starting with passive communication forms in the account-based model and going more aggressive in the transactional model.
Great. And we've got some questions coming in from the audience. I want to ask that. And this is one that I know you spoke about the other day. Is anyone using direct mail or fax as part of the cadence? Right. I know you spoke about that the other day. So what are you seeing there?
Yeah. So a couple things. In the core concept of a Cadence strategy, we would consider these 4 elements or these 4 pillars to be core, and that is phone, voicemail, email, and social. That's part of your core. We've started to look at some of these peripheral type concepts, and there's really a couple of them. One is facts, and you wouldn't believe it. I've got one study with a particular client that's showing fax was actually 8 times more effective than email. That's just one client. Then certainly you're seeing, we just did a big football drop, right? So we ran a campaign where we dropped footballs on about 200 executives. Those were signed by a professional athlete, and we're upward between about 75% meeting set rate on those. So handwritten notes, faxes, gifts, coffee, that's one I'm seeing to be very popular. But I put them in a big concept of kind of gifting. Again, pizza dropped, coffee, footballs, swag, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. I think those are really coming on, but I don't got a lot of research at the moment how effective.
That's great, and it's interesting. It's truly back to what is old is new again, right? Like this is stuff we used to do long before there was email, right? For those of us who were around doing it, and you had to actually put a stamp on something before mail became free. Hey, another question that's coming up on this too, and I hear this all the time, and I think the answer will be, well, it depends, but I think you're the expert is, by your standards, by what you guys measure, what's a good email open percentage rate? And what would you consider exceptional, right? Like, how do you guys try to measure as you test different things based on what you're accomplishing, or you have different clients doing it? Do you have anything on that, or are you guys still super highly focused on the dial side?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the dial side certainly, I think, has just come down in general. Again, you've got to be careful. Transactional model and relational model, I think we got to break those up because dials plays a bigger role. Transactional, it plays a less of a role in relational. When it comes to email open rates, I can't speak for the market specifically, or I can't speak for, everybody specifically. For us, what good looks like is typically in the teens, in the 10 to 20%. That's usually what we consider to be a solid email open rate. I feel like a lot of, past tests here have fallen more in that kind of 1% to 2% rate. Right. So unfortunately, I feel like that's probably average, but what we consider really rocking is 10 plus, 10 to 20.
Yeah, and I'd put in on that I've seen it trained in ways that you can get an open rate as high as literally 40 or 50%, but it requires super high personalization of the email that's very direct to that person about something that person has done. The challenge with that, for those that are listening, is that you're not always going to be able to find that piece of information, or finding that piece of information can take a long time. So it's very possible that you can get a super high open rate on very personalized emails, which you then know will get read. But then it really comes back to what is your response rate, because your open rate's a little bit of a vanity metric, and you do need to pay attention to it, and it does matter. But you have to be really conscious about what's your total reply rate, both negative and positive. Negative reply rates to emails are super important because then they tell you that the message within the body of the email isn't working or isn't resonating. So it's not just a question of who responded positively, it's who responded at all, as well as the open rate. So I think there's lots of conversions around that. And my answer to this question is it kind of depends, right? It depends on how big your team is, what you're capable of doing from a bandwidth perspective, what's your ACV, can you afford to have people spending, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, customizing each email. But I think that's a decent, sort of response to that question as well.
Yeah, great. What else you got, Richard? Any other good ones coming in?
Let's see what else is happening. It's a good email. So there's a question around sort of, I think maybe it just was a misquote, was that LinkedIn InMail has a 3% response rate compared to email, but the slide you had showed the opposite. So I think there's a couple of people wanting to make sure maybe you accidentally misspoke on that, or there's some clarification around it.
Yeah, so no, we just ran a quick internal study. Let me just pop back real fast. So that was actually a 3X. So LinkedIn email had actually a 3X response rate compared to email when we tested just the same subject line, same body. So not So slightly different. Maybe I'd said that wrong, but quite a bit more effective using just a different mode, right? Exact same content, different mode had quite a bit better kind of response rates. So I'm glad because that's important. So important to clear that one up.
Sure.
So I'm gonna. Oh, go ahead, Richard. Something else?
Yeah. So the question became, there's a couple other questions. As you're looking at your cadence, right, as your SMB customers versus maybe your mid-market or enterprise, do you see anything changing differently in the approach, either in the channel that you're approaching or the quantity of touches?
Yeah, definitely.
SMB company.
Yeah.
What do you see there?
Yeah, so I do want to go into this a little bit. That maybe is a good kind of bridge into how we are coaching organizations and people to build a cadence strategy. Maybe I can kind of flash this up here and you can see that. Because one of the key pieces in this works, there's kind of two parts to it. And I think this will answer your question, Richard, but it'll be a little bit longer. So we believe there's a 5-step process to build a cadence. And let me go through it and see if I can kind of answer this. So number one is the concept of a game plan. We're finding more and more that rather than just having an SDR randomly reach out, it is more effective to have kind of a cohesive strategy between marketing, sales, and sales ops, where we're going to say, hey, the campaign approach or the strategy this month, we're going to be going after X. And so we kind of build more of a campaign or cadence strategy around a specific theme. That means our talk track, that means our emails, that means some of those types of things all start to align. That power and synergy can be a real important part. So that's number one. And that'll affect kind of the way you do your cadence. Number two is this concept of position. And really we've kind of built it around position to help coach reps think through it. But you could also change this and say, are you high velocity or are you account based? Again, are you transactional or are you account based or or relational there? Or are you inbound? Are you getting inbound leads? Or are you getting out? Are you kind of focusing on outbound? These types of positions and attributes we find are greatly affecting cadence strategies. I'm starting to get a little bit offended when I hear there's a one-size-fits-all cadence, man. It's over 7 days. It's our X model and our X model. It's like it just isn't, the data's not coming out to relate to that. It's got to go deeper in this concept again of high velocity versus account based or inbound versus, you handle an inbound lead so much different than you handle an outbound lead, meaning a cold lead. So that position is becoming very important to identify who you are, who you're targeting, and then building the cadence around that. So we really dive deep into that. Number three is your target audience. Again, if you're going after a senior executive versus a director versus a manager, you've got to kind of bring that into pieces because we believe there's a different expectation based on your target. Now, when it comes to your sequence, that's kind of your concept, and there's 4 or 5 things I want to dive in here. In fact, I may do this right now because I think, Richard, this will actually get to the kind of the specific question. I'm going to move past that and go right here. When it comes to building this sequence, I think there's 4 or 5 things that we've been finding that I thought were kind of interesting enough to mention on the phone. So let's just go through a couple of these. One is assertive versus precise. So we're finding that you can be basically aggressive or you can be a little bit more strategic. So sometimes people are going to want to say, you know what, I want to hit this group hard, so I'm going to double down and do more overall touches, or I want to be a little bit more strategic. I'm going to spend more time and be a little bit more precise about what I say. The concept of, and I want to jump around here just a little bit, this mix is going to be really interesting. What methods are you going to use and how many of each activity? Now, right now, we've standardized is maybe not the right word, but most of our data is coming out around what we're calling the foundational cadence. And it is a 3 by 3 by 3 by 3. That's 12 total touches. And I'll talk about time frame, spacing, etc. Interestingly enough, and Richard, you kind of talked a little bit about phone calls. We did a landmark study, 5-6 years ago, MIT, Harvard about number of phone calls. We actually found best practice in that study was 6 phone calls. We actually just re-updated that, and we dove deeper into the data, and I don't want to bore you too much, but 6 phone calls is still best. We do believe that that is considered best practice to maximize your contact rate.
And that's I want to stop right there because I want to dive down into that. So you're saying 6 phone calls per cadence per person, included with other things. Are you seeing? Yes. And now I'm just going to get super granular because I think this is really healthy for.
Oh, I want to go there. I want to go there.
Yeah. Is it email first, then phone call? Is it phone call first, then email? Is the first phone call have a voicemail? Like this is the stuff. It's like, oh my God, 6 phone calls. That's all I got to do. I don't want people to walk away going 6. I want them to go walk away going 6, but keep this in mind too.
Yes. So you're actually jumping one step ahead. So I do want to get into that, but let me just get the foundation real quick. So those 6 phone calls, again, that's best practice. But interestingly, when we dove into the data, and I'm talking about getting kind of the needle in the haystack, what we found is that actually at 3 phone calls, you're actually maximizing your outreach. What that basically means is, and I'll try to get it as simply as possible, at 3 phone calls, you're almost maximizing your contact ability, your contact rate. Now, you do see an improvement in contact rates on call 4, 5, and 6, but not necessarily enough to maybe justify the effort in a lot of companies. So that's why you're seeing our foundational cadence is sitting at 3 phone calls. And again, I want to get into, phone call first, voicemail here in just a second, but I want to get the data behind this foundational cadence because I think it's interesting. Now, and I won't bore you with all of it. Voicemails, though, is an interesting one. We did actually run a voicemail test, 541 phone calls where we tested what is going to be the outcome of phone calls with and without leaving a voice message. Long and short story is that 3 voicemails, you actually, if you leave more than 3 voicemails, you actually decrease your chances. You actually start to hurt yourself. So we've opted to leave it right at the 3 voicemails, 3 emails, and 3 social. So we've left that as kind of our foundational cadence. Now, depending on if you're transactional and relational, depending on if you're going at a VP or a director, you're going to start to tweak this slightly if you want to be a little bit more aggressive. But we're going to typically start here. So I want to make sure we got that foundation in place. Now, let's go back, Richard, and hit just a couple of your points. Where was it? Right there. So I want to get it into just a couple of these. So I just hit mix. Now let's hit length, touches, spacing, intervals, and then I want to talk about how you mix the art and the science, and I think that's your question. So the mix we just hit on, the length, we're typically seeing 10 to 20 business days on average. That's 2 or 4 weeks if you just go pure month, 10 to 20 business days or 2 to 4 weeks. That's going to basically give you a 2-week or month cadence. Now, Gabe, why the 2 different lengths? That's a question I'm often getting. That seems weird. Well, again, if I was just giving you the one size fits all, I'd just BS you here and say, yeah, it's going to be 1 or 2 weeks. With some of those other factors, again, one of the biggest factors, high velocity versus account based. Your high velocity, you're going to jam pack more touches in a shorter time frame. In an account based model, you're getting more strategic. You're spacing those out a little bit more. That's one of the big reasons we're seeing kind of the difference in time frames versus the 2-week versus the 4-week. So I think that's kind of an interesting one. Let's go to, and Richard, feel free to jump me. I'm getting
I've got another question on this. Yeah, no. There's a couple of questions coming in that people are pretty excited about this particular topic of the 6 phone call study. So one of the first questions is this an inbound or an outbound of this study that you conducted, right? Was this from inbound leads or outbound leads with this 6 call sort of recommendation? Or was it across multitude of clients?
Yep. So that was actually just a cross mix. This is actually, that particular study was all in one. It was looking at both inbound and outbound. The other question was, is it one company you did the study with, or is it across of like 4 or 5 or 6 different clients you guys had? No. Yeah, this is actually a pretty big one. So this is looking at 100,000 plus phone calls. I'd need to look at the number of participants, but it's not this wasn't just a certainly within our labs, within my own teams, we do run studies.
Right.
This one was 100,000 phone calls again. A large
That's
number of clients there. But again, I did want to say on the subset of that, when you broke the data down a little bit, we did find, optimally speaking, inbound, you should be getting more phone calls. So we actually recommend best practice almost up to 10 on inbound when we subsetted some of that data. On outbound, again, that 3 to 6 being kind of optimal is where we found it. But again, your biggest bang for your buck on average is that 3 phone calls, which I thought was interesting.
Okay, great. Let's go on. I think there's some other.
Okay. Good, man. Yeah, because we're going. There's plenty more. I do want to get even more tactical, Richard. So I promise I'm not leaving that. But I just want to hit again a couple of these more foundational pieces. So let's go touches for a minute. And guys, this is the meat of it, right? I think, again, I'm with Richard. I don't want you to leave today and say, Inside Sales thinks we should call 3 times. I want to get into the mix, the length, the touch, the spacing, the intervals, what comes first and why. Let's get into it. So push me as far as you can, as hard as you can, because I'm with you. When it comes to the nitty gritty, let's do it. So let's just hit touches for a second. So when we looked at touches, I had typically heard 8 to 10. That's the number I felt like the last couple of years we've been hearing is kind of the right overall touches. I'm not talking about phone calls. I'm just talking general. We're now seeing that move more in that 10 to 15 range. And again, I'm going to talk about kind of spacing and how to do that. So 10 to 15 overall touches seems to be about right. And again, depending on a couple of those factors, you may mix and match that. This spacing one, you guys, was fascinating. This was probably the one that I thought was the most interesting in thinking about effectiveness, because this one's all over the board. I've got a client I literally was at yesterday who said, again, they go every week and then they go every 2 weeks for an 8-week period. You know, I'm hearing all sorts of different kind of overall spacing. Where we've ended up is what we're referring to as kind of the law of immediacy. And it really falls in that 1 to 4 days between touches. We find if you go longer than 4 days, we're starting to lose, from a qualitative standpoint, you're starting to lose that concept of who are these people? I've almost forgot about you. One touch 1 week and then another touch a week later. I'm not really building the story that I need to build in order to educate my buyer to where I want them to go. So again, 1 to 4, and again, transactional is typically sitting in that 1 to 3. So if you're focusing on inbound leads, you're a transactional rep, high volume, your spacing is going to be pretty darn quick. 1, 2, max 3 days. If you're account-based, you're more in that 3 to 4. You're being a little bit more strategic and hitting people a little bit less often because of kind of the strategy behind the whole concept. Now, last but not least is the intervals. This interval, a lot of people are like, why do you even bring this up? I mean, guys, we just wanted to dive into the details. So apologize if this is deeper than you used to go, but what is the optimal interval? In the market you're seeing, I'm going to do, 1 day, then 5 days later, then 2 days later, then 7 days later, then 4 days later, then 12 days later. Mostly for consistency and management, we're finding 2 to 3 spacing intervals is ideal. That basically means going day 1, day 4, day 7, that's 3 days between, and then maybe going back to 2 days, day 9, day 11, day 13. Pick 2 spacing intervals to keep consistency, but do mix it up. That's one of the big takeaways is if you just go every Monday for 4 weeks, you're probably going to be in a bad place. So trying to get a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then a Tuesday, Thursday, that's kind of 3 days, and then 2 days is kind of the right mix and match we're finding there. So
how many activities? Let's say it's day 1, right? And you've got 10 to 15 touches total that you're going to try and run through this cadence. In that first touch or that first day, are you doing 3 activities where it is an email and it is a phone call with a voicemail, and then maybe a ghost call where you call it another time in the day but don't leave a voicemail? Like, is that what you're really saying also? Like, how many actual activities are you talking about?
Yeah, so Richard, guys, is pushing me. He's pushing me, which is I asked him to do it. So I want to show you, Richard. I'm only going to highlight a couple. I'm going to leave a downloadable with you that's our 7 templates that we have maximized here at InsideSales.com in really driving results. And I'm going to just flash them and let's just walk through them. So this is it, right? Good or bad or ugly. This is what has been effective for us here at InsideSales.com. Marketing gave them some names, so I apologize if they're kind of goofy names, but you're looking at the contender here. That's actually okay. The contender. You're looking at the contender here, and I want to highlight a couple things because you're not going to see the one-size-fits-all. I apologize. Some of you may wanted to see, there's wave the magic wand. But you're going to see a couple concepts up here. The attributes, the assertive. We have opted to take away the target for this example. So that may affect it a little bit. But what you're seeing right here is what we call the contender. It's a sequence strategy of 5-3-4-3. Again, we always name our cadences by going from aggressive to passive. That means 5 phone calls, 3 voice messages, 4 emails, and 3 social touches. That's a total of 15. Now notice the attributes. This would be a high velocity rep or a transactional, but they're focusing on cold calling. They're basically outbounding more or less. They're not focusing on inbound generated demand. And we've then opted to call this an assertive cadence, meaning we're going to be a little bit more aggressive. Probably going to start with some phone calls, probably going to see a little bit more aggressive communication, such as email and phone throughout. And I'm going to show you a few examples of how we've mixed and matched. Now, the truth of this is, Richard, this is a little bit where the art and the science is coming into play. We're trying as many cadence templates as we can to figure out what is that art and science. I tried to set up the first kind of 30 minutes of this conversation and talk about the science. Unfortunately, I'm going to now have to get into a little bit of the art as we internally test which is best, and you'll see. Again, some of this is a little bit of an art. So let me walk you through it real quick. So you can see this one's over a 10-day period. These are 10 business days. I put samples down there on the bottom. So we're going Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's 1 day between. And then we kind of break it up and go that 3-day or 4-day break between them. In the transactional model, you're typically, I really don't like to just have one touch per day. So you're starting with a phone call. That's PC. VM is voicemail, EM is email, and then SM is going to be social media. So we're leading here with phone, voicemail, and email. And again, I would say most often, Richard, I know some people may not want to hear this, in a transactional model, you often lead with that more aggressive communication. I'm going to show you a relational model, and you'll see that it leads with social and email. But notice that difference. So we've kind of opted here, and again, you're seeing kind of that 5 phone call, 3 voicemail, 4 email, 3 social touches, and we've mixed and matched it over that 10-day period. Comments or kind of thoughts on this? I want to show you a couple others, but this has been a very effective cadence for our transactional high-volume outbound team, which would be basically an SMB team.
Great. Real quick, just one of the questions coming from the audience, and I think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer, is this, when you talk about these 10 to 15 touches, are you talking about to make the sale or to get that first meeting?
Yeah, this is all cadence, you guys. This is all prospecting cadence. So
right, so it's all about getting that first meeting.
That's right. So you basically, I've gone on LinkedIn, I've said, I want to reach out to this person. I want to get a conversation with them. How do I best do that? I try a phone call to start. I didn't get it. I leave a voice message. I send an email that afternoon. The very next day, I do a phone call number 2, and I drop another voicemail. Right. Day 3. Right. So we're trying to get them on the phone to get a conversation. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's really great. Trying to think, another question that came up was on this question of voicemails we were talking about, and then I know we're going to go into the relational piece, but I sort of want to hit these while the topics are hot. Have you guys measured success rate of people leaving voicemails versus no voicemail? Like, are you speak about the data? What do you see as that? What's the data telling you?
Yeah, so the 2 things, I've just got 2 data points for you. One is in our communication study, where we had business-to-business responses that said 66% of the time they are willing to respond to a voicemail. So that was take it for what it is. I can get you the total number of respondents, but I got 66% of people saying they would be likely to respond to a voicemail. So that's one piece. The second piece, and I don't have the data slide with me, we just ran an internal study, actually 541 phone calls, where we looked at phone calls with a voicemail and phone calls without a voicemail, and we basically looked at key metrics associated with that. Contact rates, response rates, how fast the deal moved through the cycle, etc. We found that voicemail was not only powerful, but the number was 3. At 3 voicemails, that's where you got your biggest bang for your buck. If you left 4 voicemails, interestingly, we noticed that some of the numbers dropped. At 1 to 2 voicemails, it was kind of like a didn't really seem to matter. 3 voicemails, and again, hit me up on LinkedIn, you guys. I'll send you the data sheet that shows the chart saying calls with no voicemail, calls with voicemail, and you see right at 3 this kind of beautiful synergy happening. So we've kind of opted to stick with that 3 number. Those are the 2 data points on voicemail.
Great. Then the other questions that are coming in is, how is either traditional sales cycle, length of the sale for that particular organization affecting this, and also possibly the average sale price? Does that affect any of this too, or is it the same?
Yeah. Nope, it is. And Richard, you and I talked about this the other day. So when we talk about, and we've really tried to almost get a standard around this, almost like what is a high velocity or transactional rep versus what is an account-based or kind of a strategic or relational rep. So the answer is absolutely does that factor in, and it's actually the biggest factor in why cadences are different, high velocity versus account based. Now, what is a high velocity? We've narrowed it down right now to 4 factors, or what is an account based versus high velocity? Number 1, number of decision makers. If you're looking at in a sale, if you've got 5+ decision makers, we constitute you as an account-based strategy. If your ACV is over 50,000, we constitute you as an account-based. If your sales cycle longer than 90 days, we constitute you as an account-based. If your customer demands a red carpet experience, and sometimes that trumps everything, we constitute you as an account-based strategy. So you, most importantly, if you don't get anything from me today, but what that question basically got out of me is there's not a one-size-fits-all cadence strategy. The biggest factor for differentiation in cadence is transactional sales, which have those 4 elements, or account-based sales. And you've got to take that into consideration.
Great, awesome. Well, let's move over from this particular model over to the relational model that I know you wanted to share with everybody.
Yeah, so here's kind of give the names here. I didn't come up with the names, you guys, the strategist, whatever. So notice a couple things here, right? I mentioned relational outbound. So what is this? This is your account-based model, 6-month sales cycle, $250K, average ACV. We're going kind of for the bigger dogs here. And notice the type is precise. So I'm being a little bit more strategic. I'm being a little bit less aggressive, if you will. So very much like Richard said, I'm leading potentially with a social in the morning, and I drop them an email in the afternoon. A few days later, notice the spacing just got a little bit longer. We're now at a 3 to 4 day spacing versus that 1 to 2 day in relational. And notice, again, we don't lead with phone. We're not leading on day 1 with phone. That's coming all the way 3 days later, potentially after we've done 3 other touches, a social, an email 2, and then in the afternoon of day 4, we do drop them our first phone call. Longer, 18-day cadence versus 10-day cadence, right? So that's sitting right in that kind of 2.5-week business day period, but quite a bit different, you guys, right? There's just a completely different mindset, and there should be. We're talking about a completely different sales cycle. So this shouldn't be too surprising. Phone calls, not very many, 3 total phone calls. Now, a lot of people, I thought you guys were the phone call company. Guys, the data doesn't lie. I'm sorry. I wish we sell a dialer. I wish, the data said you should call 1,000 times. It doesn't. You got to be with the times, and the times are saying 3 phone calls that's kind of your optimal. Let's bring in some of these other tools to make sure we're being as strategic as possible. Comments on that? Good questions, Richard?
I think there's always this question too of, and it's a general question, is you build out these cadences, right? And there's always this concern of stalking, right? You don't want to be the stalker. And, no matter what company you're focused on, even if you go through a cadence and they don't want to buy now, you still want to, engage them a year from now, 2 years from now, because your total market is a finite number, right? How do you manage the consistency of a strong cadence with the appropriate level of aggressiveness, right? Without becoming the stalker, and then you turn people off?
Yeah, well, I think what you're looking on, I love the question, first of all. I think what you're looking on in the screen is the start of that. By having a random cadence, you're just going after these people randomly for months and months. If you say Gabe, and I believe in systematizing that with InsideSales.com's product or somebody else's product, you want to get a systematized cadence. For the next 18 business days, we're going to run this program. If nothing happens, this is where I think great companies do it, and I feel like we don't do it too shabby ourselves here. If I ran this cadence internally at 18 days, I would basically update a contact or lead status to not interested. What that basically does is, if you've gleaned any kind of information, I hope you can follow this. If you've gleaned any kind of information as a substatus under not interested, you're going to have multiple kind of sub-dispositions. Competition, didn't answer, right person. These different dispositions do trigger an enrollment campaign for marketing to slowly touch over the next 3 months this person using a specific enrollment campaign from the lead status. Now, we're typically in our business 3 or 6 months later, that person automatically comes back up for re-enrollment in one of our playbooks. So 3 or 6 months later, and we would then enroll them in a new cadence. It may not be this exact 18-day cadence, but it may be, the 10-day or the 12, whichever one we're kind of filling. But I feel like that strategy, Richard, of hitting them with the system, letting them cool off, but don't just ignore them. 3 months later, depending on how important the prospect is, hit them again with the kind of a good cadence, then keep running that process. If they're the right person, it's all about education. Again, we're not talking about just dialing and trying to get someone on the phone. That's why our definition of cadence is about increasing qualification rates. You are educating people through this process.
Right. I think that's the important thing too, is that it's not just the frequency of touches. It is the message, right? It is appropriate at some point.
The message. Yeah.
Right. And it is appropriate at some point in the cadence, whatever cadence you're trying. If people find these to be a little too aggressive for them, it's certainly appropriate to say, have the appropriate breakup email or voicemail that says, hey, if you're just not interested at this time, please let us know. Right. And a lot of times people will just say, hey, thanks for telling me I can tell you no. And then that tells you to back off for a while, and then you can reapproach, as opposed to just sort of bombarding them without any humanization to the cadence, right? I think that's a big piece. Another question I think that comes up a lot, that's not coming from the group, this comes from me, is so you've got your SDR team focusing on this. How do you manage this around with marketing and whatever they're doing for drip campaigns? Because, if you've got someone going through a cadence, are you taking them out of any marketing cadence too? Because then it could become, all of a sudden they're getting, an extra 4 or 5 messages. And sometimes the sales rep or the SDR doesn't even know that message is going out. What do you guys do around that?
Yeah. I mean, what we do internally is if someone is basically enrolled in, again, our product is called playbooks. They're enrolled in a playbooks or a cadence strategy, then it does take it out of the marketing drip campaign. Now, there's certain instances that'll basically be put back in, and there's always asterisk on that. But yeah, I mean, our belief is that if you're really running what you're seeing here, more of an account-based or strategic model, you would basically be assigning personas to, you'd say, hey, look, marketing, we maybe want you to drip campaign these 2 people. Sales development's going to maybe go after this person. The executive's going to go after this person. So I'm not a big believer that sales should run a cadence on the same person that marketing is, that sales development should. I mean, what we're seeing here is that sales development reps are becoming better marketers. They're being asked to do that. And I'm so glad you mentioned messaging, because truthfully, in this session, I've talked more about the touches and a little bit of the science between the touches. But if you have one good email with kick butt messaging, it doesn't matter. The rest doesn't even matter. Messaging is so much more important than the overall touches. But I do like to make sure there's alignment and certainly not duplication.
Great. I know we've got about 10 minutes left. I know there's a ton of questions that some people are asking, so we'll try to get to them. But are there a couple other points you want to get to? Because I know we've sort of spent a lot of time on this. I want to make sure we get through some more of the meaty stuff for you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm basically done actually. So it's been good. I wanted to highlight this because this is again kind of a different flavor. This is now saying an inbound response, right? Now this is precise. If I was going aggressive, you'd see this a little bit more detailed. But notice on inbound that the phone calls kind of bumped up. The effectiveness of phone, they came to us. I'm trying to get these people on the phone. Social typically in our world is played a little bit less effective of a role on inbound. But I wanted to kind of get that different flavor in there so that you could see transactional outbound, relational outbound, and then, oh my goodness, inbound also adds kind of a different flavor when you're responding to inbound leads versus going cold. So I will close it up here and say, I don't know if these are magic templates, you guys, but these are the 7 cadence templates that we have seen to be damn effective in our own business at InsideSales.com. And we've been running it in the labs here, and we thought, what the hell, might as well give it out and see if other people can see some value here. So feel free to leave behind, grab the link, go check them out, and continue the conversation. If you don't add me on LinkedIn, I will be offended. So please continue the conversation.
Hey, we'll get a couple of minutes, so let's maybe go back and answer a couple more of these questions that have come in that I think are great. And by the way, to the entire audience, thank you guys for being so participatory. I hope we get to all of your questions. But one of the questions is sort of defining the social media piece, right? Like I think early on we talked about LinkedIn and email. Talk a little bit more about what that social touch might be these days, or what you guys are seeing success with.
Yeah, so I mentioned it, and if you go on my LinkedIn, I got hit up on this so much, I just wrote a quick LinkedIn blurb. You'll find kind of a little article on it with a little diagram that we actually use internally, and it shows you kind of how we manage our social cadence as part of that 3x3x3x3 or that foundational piece. So thinking of 3 social touches, we've opted for that concept of comment, connect, and then call to action. Now, what does that comment mean? This is a debate, Richard. Internally, a lot of people were starting with the connection, and it just didn't seem to go as well. So we've opted to switch that around. It seems to be more effective to start with we actually refer to it as love, leaving unsolicited validation. That's LUV. So whether you send in a LinkedIn in-mail that doesn't have a specific ask, that's a little more cordial, a little more informal, or you go comment on one of their posts, you go like one of their posts on LinkedIn, go to their recent activity, you do that warm-up concept, and again, we call it love, leaving unsolicited validation. You hit that concept there. Then, man, if you can get a conversation going, fantastic, because great comments lead into conversation, but we start with the comment, then move to connection. At that point, if you've been able to comment a little bit, then we believe you go out and go connection. Never blind connect. That's really ineffective. We actually have identified 10 different connection strategies internally that we try to use. And then we believe you've got to get out of social. You've got to call to action. It's very hard to sell a deal. You can certainly converse for years, but my team doesn't get paid on conversations. They get paid on deals. So call to action is you've got to get to that point where you do an ask. Now that could mean, frankly, hey, let's meet in person. It could mean let's do a phone call. Could mean what's actually been very effective internally is here's digestible content, actually something you're seeing right here. You comment on, say, hey, I noticed you've been talking about cadence. We connect, we start talking about it, and then you actually send them and ask them to do something. Go download these Cadence templates. You'll love it. You've got to get to a call to action and see if you can't bridge from passive communication to a little bit more of assertive. So those 3 steps is kind of where we go.
Yeah. And I love that. I think that's what we're seeing. 5 years ago, InMail was fantastic. Like if someone InMailed me, I was thrilled. I was like, wow, it's like getting a letter in the mail, right? And now it's just become we've got this big callus on our brain about InMails. It's like, oh shit, another InMail's coming in. What are they asking me for? And in most cases, those InMails are people asking for the meeting, and they haven't earned the right to ask me for the meeting. It's not they don't have the right to ask, but as you said in your love comment, they haven't given any validation that would make me want to have a meeting with them. So I completely agree with you. So what I talked about earlier is that having some social ahead of time that provides some validation or adds value. I send this stuff out all the time, whether it's to my clients or prospects, like, hey, I saw this article, made me think of you, hope you enjoy it. That's it. Like, I don't ask for anything. I'm just trying to add value that they know I'm thinking about them. And as human beings, we all respect that and emotionally appreciate those kinds of things. So,
the funny thing is,
go for it.
This last point on that is that a lot of times people will say, "How do you sell on social?" And you just answered it. You don't. You actually don't sell on social. You actually
it's not social
value.
Selling. It's not social selling. It's social prospecting.
I think that's important,
right?
Yeah,
Trish Bertuzzi called it. It's social prospecting. It's not social selling. Social selling. If you've had a meeting with someone, right, and they're doing well, then you could do a little social afterwards, retweet something they've done. But that's still part of the prospecting piece. And to a large extent, even if they become a client, of course you want to retweet their tweets or like their comments. But that's still that might be considered social selling once they're a client, and that's you're selling them to stick with you. A couple of questions. Do you guys have any? Any questions? A couple of questions. One was any success with Twitter direct messaging? Have you gotten that granular on Twitter? How are you? We all think about LinkedIn when we think social. In a lot of ways for business. How are you guys working with Twitter?
Yeah, good, fair question. The problem is Twitter, we're finding specifically internally, is very effective for selling into SaaS, IT, a little bit of telecom. But because we focus on sales teams, I was at a glove manufacturer in Toronto. Twitter. It's just not been effective enough for our full entire sales team. People who are selling into SaaS, they'll use that very same concept, right? Comment, connect, and call to action. They'll use Twitter for that first concept, right? I'll go and like one of their Twitter. I'll follow them, right? That's a great way to show a little bit of love. But just in our business, our clients range so much that I don't got any conclusive data on it. I know some reps who do it, and they seem to like it. The other thing is Facebook. I know Facebook, that's a little bit of a misnomer. Like, you can't use that in B2B, but certainly our marketing team's starting to utilize that a lot more in retargeting ads as we move more into kind of a self-service model where you can just buy our product as an individual. I think Facebook is going to continue to play kind of a role in that. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see a little more something there. But I think that's going to start as it is more with marketing. We'll see how that bridges into sales.
Oh, that's great. Interesting. Okay, cool. Well, I know we've got about 1 minute left. So I know you said to people, everybody please connect with Gabe on LinkedIn. By all means, connect with me. If we didn't get to your questions, please feel free to send them over to me over at richard@saleshacker.com. I'll be glad to circle them up with Gabe, or we'll pull them off this list and try and get to everyone. And otherwise, we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Gabe, I didn't know if you had any sort of parting words, or, is there a 50% discount if they buy today from InsideSales.com, or was that yesterday? That was yesterday, right?
I think that was yesterday. No, like I said, you better continue the conversation. I mean, guys, I appreciate, Richard, you kind of playing goalkeeper there, because I wanted to get into some of the detail. I hope you guys are walking away with some tangible stuff. I hope this didn't feel like I'm an executive talking about how Cadence is important. Let's get in and have the real conversations, and we'll see some real results.
That's great. Gabe, thank you very much. And everyone here who joined us from Sales Hacker, thank you so much for another great webinar. We really appreciate your time today and hope everybody's doing well this week. Finish the quarter strong, everyone.
That's right. Take care.